The cold cuts like stone blades. Kael runs across the snow-covered plain, his lungs burning with each breath. Behind him, the deafening roar of a cave bear echoes among the icy mountains. His footprints leave trails of blood in the white snow. Not his blood, but that of his fellow hunters who lie motionless 300 meters away. He is the only one who survived. But this is not just another story of survival in prehistory. This is the story of how a young hunter, marked by tragedy and forged by the eternal ice, became the greatest leader the clans have ever known. A journey that began with loss, continued with discovery, and ended with a revolution that would forever change how humans dominate nature. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's understand who Kael was before that fateful day in the frozen tundra. 20,000 years ago, during the height of the last ice age, Europe was an unrecognizable continent. Giant glaciers covered the north, while in the south, vast steppes and tundras stretched as far as the eye could see. In this brutal and unforgiving world, small groups of humans struggled not only to survive, but to thrive. Kael's clan, known as the Hunters of the North Wind, numbered around 40 people. They lived in natural caves on the rocky slopes, sheltered from the biting winds that swept across the plain. During the brief, intense summer, they hunted reindeer and wild horses. But it was in winter that the real hunt took place, the mammoth hunt. These woolly giants were more than just food. A single mammoth could feed the entire clan for weeks. Their tusks provided tools, their hides created shelters, their bones built structures. Mastering the art of mammoth hunting meant survival. Failure meant extinction. Kael was 19 winters old when our story begins. Tall by the standards of his people, with muscles hardened by years of hunting, he was considered one of the most promising young hunters. His brown eyes held the intensity of someone who had learned early that hesitation kills. His father, Theron, was the leader of the hunters, a respected, even feared man for his courage and tactical wisdom. But Kael carried a weight few knew about. 3 winters ago, during a spring hunt, his older brother, Darian, had been killed by a cave lion. He was there. He had frozen with fear as the predator attacked. Since then, a question haunted him on cold nights. When the critical moment arrived again, would he be able to act, or would he freeze once more? The sun rose weakly that winter morning. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, and recent tracks indicated that a herd of mammoths had passed through the area. Theron gathered the hunters, 12 men in total, including Kael. It was an experienced group, veterans who had faced these giants dozens of times. "Listen carefully," Theron's voice echoed in the main cave as everyone prepared. "We saw the tracks. It's a small herd, maybe 5 or 6 adults, but small doesn't mean easy. A mammoth can crush a man like you would crush an insect. Respect the animal, follow the plan, and we'll all return home." He looked directly at Kael. There was something in that look. It wasn't just the connection between father and son. It was the weight of expectation, the silent pressure of proving their worth. The hunters armed themselves with spears of fire-hardened wood, sharp stone points tied with sinews. Some carried torches. Fire was one of the few things mammoths feared. The strategy was simple in theory, deadly in practice. Separate a young or old mammoth from the herd, corner it in a nearby ravine, and then attack with spears while the fire kept the other animals away. Simple. But nature rarely follows human plans.
They tracked the herd for 3 hours. The wind was working in the hunters' favor, masking their scent from the mammoths. Finally, in the snow-covered valley between 2 rock formations, they found their target. A herd of 7 mammoths, including 2 still-furred calves playing in the snow. Theron signaled. The plan was in motion. Half the hunters positioned themselves to the north, the other half to the south. Kael was with his father's group. With coordinated shouts and lit torches, they emerged from their hiding places, attempting to separate an elderly mammoth that was limping slightly. At first, it worked. The elderly mammoth, startled by the fire and the shouts, began to move away from the group. The other mammoths retreated, their trunks raised in alarm. A few more meters and they would have the animal isolated. But then something unexpected happened. A female mammoth, likely the matriarch, did not retreat. She turned, her long curved tusks gleaming in the cold sunlight. Her small but intelligent eyes assessed the situation. And then she attacked. Not the old mammoth, she attacked the hunters. 5 tons of primal fury surged against the southern group. The men scattered, but they weren't fast enough. The mammoth seized 2 hunters with her tusks, launching them into the air like straw dummies. They landed with dull thuds, their bodies motionless in the snow. "Retreat!" Theron shouted, but chaos had already ensued. Another mammoth, a young and aggressive male, joined the attack. The hunters' formation crumbled. Men ran in all directions. A spear struck the young male's flank, but only enraged the creature further. And then Kael saw. His father, Theron, was surrounded, the matriarch on one side, the young male on the other. Theron gripped his spear, his eyes calculating, searching for a way out. But there was no way out. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion for Kael. He saw his father raise the spear. He saw the matriarch charge. He saw destiny unfold before his eyes. And this time, he didn't freeze. Kael ran, his cries tearing through the icy air. He grabbed a fallen torch and waved it frantically, positioning himself between his father and the matriarch. The fire worked. The mammoth hesitated, its tusks inches from Kael's face. "Go away!" Kael yelled, his voice a mixture of fear and fury. "Go!" For an eternity, he looked into the mammoth's eyes. There was intelligence there. There was anger, yes, but also something more. A mother protecting her family, just as Kael protected his. The matriarch retreated. With a final warning trumpet blast, she gathered her herd and began to walk away, her calf running close to her legs. But the victory came at a high price. Of the 12 hunters who set out that morning, only 7 returned. 5 men laid dead in the snow. Good men, fathers, brothers, friends. The clan had lost almost half of its experienced hunters in a single morning. Theron was wounded, 3 broken ribs and a bruised leg, but alive. During the walk back, Theron placed his hand on Kael's shoulder. "You saved my life," he said simply. The words were few, but their weight was immense. Kael merely nodded, still processing what had happened. He hadn't frozen, but 5 men were dead. Was it a victory or a defeat? That night, as the clan mourned their dead around the campfires, a question hung in the cold air. How would they survive? With half the hunters lost, how could they hunt mammoths again? How would they feed 40 people during the cruel winter that still had months to go? And it was that night, watching the dancing flames, that Kael began to have an idea that everyone would consider crazy, an idea that would change everything.
3 days after the disaster, the clan gathered. The older women, the guardians of traditions, spoke of abandoning the territory and joining another clan further south. The few remaining hunters were divided. Some supported migration, others insisted on staying.
Theron, still recovering from his injuries, tried to maintain order, but his authority was shaken. A leader who loses half his men also loses the trust of his people. It was then that Kael stood up. "There is another way," his voice pierced the murmur of the cave. Everyone turned to look at him. "A way we have never tried before." "Speak, son of Theron," one of the elders said, her voice skeptical but interested. Kael took a deep breath. What he was about to propose challenged everything his people knew about hunting, about survival, about their relationship with animals. "What if," he began, choosing his words carefully, "instead of hunting the animals, we controlled them?" Silence. Then laughter. Laughter that died when they saw that Kael was completely serious. "Explain," Theron said, his expression unreadable. And Kael explained. He had observed how mammoths behaved, how they followed the matriarch, how they protected the young, how they had hierarchies and family ties. He had seen wolves hunting in coordinated packs. He had noticed how some animals, when young, could be less fearful of humans. "What if," Kael proposed, "we could make the animals follow us? What if instead of hunting a mammoth every full moon, risking our lives each time, we could have animals that provide us with meat, milk, hides, without hunting?" The idea was revolutionary, absurd, impossible, but it was also the only hope they had. Kael's proposal was met with skepticism and even hostility. The older hunters shook their heads, murmuring about the arrogance of youth. How could a young man of only 19 winters believe he could change the way humans had lived for thousands of generations? "Animals are wild by nature," argued Boren, a veteran hunter with deep scars crisscrossing his face. "They'd kill us as much as we kill them. Control a mammoth? You could try controlling the wind or commanding the ice." But Theron, surprisingly, didn't dismiss the idea immediately. He remained seated, thoughtful, his fingers tracing patterns in the sand on the cave floor. "Let the boy try," he finally said, his voice cutting through the objections. "We have 2 moons of stored food. If in 1 moon he doesn't show results, we'll abandon the territory. But if there's a chance, however small, of surviving without losing more men, it's worth a try." And so, Kael gained his time. 1 moon, 30 days to prove the impossible. That night, while the clan slept, Kael stayed awake, gazing at the stars through the cave opening. He had spoken confidently before the clan, but now, alone, fear gripped him. What if he was wrong? What if it was truly impossible? 5 men had died, and now he was gambling everyone's survival on a crazy idea. But then he remembered the matriarch's eyes. There was intelligence there, connection. If a matriarch could understand danger and protect her family, perhaps she could understand other things as well.
Kael didn't start with mammoths. He wasn't suicidal, just determined. Instead, he began with something smaller, more manageable: wolves. Near the clan's camp, there was a pack that frequently prowled, waiting for scraps of game. They were cautious but curious animals, keeping their distance but never fleeing completely. Kael had observed that the pups in particular were less fearful. He began by leaving pieces of meat a certain distance from the camp. On the first day, the wolves didn't approach while he was visible. On the second day, a young, curious wolf approached while Kael remained motionless 20 paces away. On the third day, something extraordinary happened. The young wolf, whom Kael began to call Shadow because of his dark fur, didn't just take the meat, he stayed. He sat in the snow and ate while Kael watched, his yellow eyes occasionally meeting Kael's with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Come," Kael whispered, his hand outstretched, holding another piece of meat. "Come, Shadow." The wolf didn't come that day, but on the fourth day he approached to within 10 paces, on the sixth day to within 5 paces, and on the 8th day, for the first time in recorded history, a wild wolf ate from a human's hand. Kael's hands trembled, not from fear, but from ecstasy. He could feel Shadow's wet muzzle, its sharp teeth delicately taking the meat from his palm. For a brief, magical moment, predator and human shared a space, united not by struggle, but by trust. But Kael wasn't satisfied merely feeding a wolf. He needed to prove he could control, direct, use these creatures. And it was during the second week that he made a discovery that would change everything. He was observing Shadow interact with his pack when he noticed something fascinating: the dynamics of dominance. There was an alpha wolf, a large, scarred male who led through posture, growls, and occasionally physical displays. The other wolves responded not only out of fear, but instinct, to a deeply ingrained hierarchy. What if Kael could become part of that hierarchy? He began to observe not only the wolves, but all the animals around him. The reindeer had herd leaders. The wild horses followed dominant mares. Even the mammoths, as he had seen, followed matriarchs. The animals already lived in social structures. Kael just needed to figure out how to fit into them. He began to bring Naya, a young girl from the clan, with a special gift for understanding behavior, along for his observations. Naya was 15 years old and considered different by the others. She spoke little, but observed a great deal, spending hours studying how the animals moved, how they communicated. "They don't just use sounds," Naya told Kael as they observed the pack. "See how that she-wolf lowers her body when the alpha approaches? That's submission. And how he keeps his tail high and his chest open? That's dominance. They have a language, Kael, not of words, but of postures, of energy." That was the key Kael needed.
On the 15th day of his one-moon term, Kael decided to test his theory more dramatically. He led Shadow, who now followed him voluntarily in exchange for food, to where a small group of reindeer were grazing. The reindeer immediately became alarmed by the wolf's presence. They began to huddle together, prepared to flee. But then Kael did something that left Naya, who accompanied him, completely perplexed. He placed himself between Shadow and the reindeer. "No," he said firmly to the wolf, his body posture dominant, his gaze direct and defiant. "No." Shadow looked at the reindeer, then at Kael, then back at the reindeer. Every instinct of the animal screamed to hunt. But there was something stronger, the connection he had built with this strange human who fed him, who spent time with him, who had somehow become part of his mental hierarchy. Shadow sat down. He groaned, frustrated, but he sat down. And the reindeer, confused but no longer under immediate threat, returned to grazing, keeping their distance but not fleeing completely. Naya looked at Kael, her eyes wide. You just told a predator not to hunt, and it obeyed." Kael smiled, but it was a tense smile. This was only the beginning. Controlling a young wolf was one thing. What he really needed to do was far more ambitious and infinitely more dangerous.
he needed to apply these principles to reindeer, to horses, and eventually, if all went well, to mammoths. With only 2 weeks left on his deadline, Kael presented the next phase of his plan to the clan. He had proven he could bond with a wolf. Now he needed to prove he could control a real food source. His target, a small group of young reindeer that regularly grazed near a sheltered valley 3 kilometers from the camp. "We'll build a barrier," Kael explained, drawing in the snow, "not to trap them, but to guide them. We'll lead the reindeer to a fenced-in valley where they'll have food and protection from predators. In return, they'll stay close, and we can hunt when necessary without the risk of long chases." "And what prevents the reindeer from simply jumping the barrier and escaping?" Boren challenged, still skeptical. "Nothing at first," Kael admitted, "but if we keep them fed, protected, if they associate our presence with safety, they'll stay, just like Sombra stayed." It was Naya who added the next crucial piece of the plan. "And we'll use Sombra," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Wolves are predators of reindeer. If Sombra obeys us, we can use him to guide the herd, to move them in the direction we want, without hurting them." It was a bold plan, to use a predator to control prey, to create a barrier not to imprison, but to protect, to fundamentally change the relationship between humans and animals from hunter-prey to something completely new, something that would later be called domestication.
10 clan members, including Kael, Naya, Theron, still recovering but insisting on participating, and 7 others, worked for 3 days to build the barrier. It wasn't elaborate. Intertwined branches, stacked stones, creating a funnel that led to a natural valley surrounded by rock formations on 3 sides. They scattered moss and lichen, foods that the reindeer loved, inside the valley. They kept other predators away from the area. And then, on the morning of the 19th day, they put the plan into action. With Sombra beside Kael, responding to simple voice and gesture commands, they began to guide a group of 8 young reindeer toward the valley. At first, the reindeer panicked at the wolf's presence, but Kael kept Sombra under control, allowing the wolf only to show its presence, never attacking, only guiding. The reindeer ran exactly where Kael wanted, through the funnel, into the protected valley. Once inside, something surprising happened. The reindeer, expecting attack, instead found abundant food. They found water from a stream. They found protection from the biting wind. And the humans and the wolf simply retreated, watching from afar. For 3 days, the clan kept the reindeer in the valley, not imprisoned, but gently discouraged from leaving, always with food available, always with Shadow patrolling but never attacking. And on the 4th day, when Kael deliberately opened a path out, the reindeer looked at the opening and did not flee. "They stayed," Naya whispered, her voice full of admiration. "They chose to stay." Theron, watching from his position beside Kael, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did the impossible," he said, and there was emotion in his voice. "You changed the rules." But Kael knew this was only the beginning. 8 reindeer wouldn't feed the clan for long, and more importantly, his ultimate goal remained distant and daunting. He didn't just want to control reindeer. He wanted to control the most significant power source in the tundra. He wanted to discover if it was possible, just perhaps, to forge a connection with the true giants of the prehistoric world. He wanted to understand mammoths. That night, the 22nd day of his deadline, Kael lay down but couldn't sleep. His success with the reindeer had bought time and some credibility, but he knew his vision was bigger. Reindeer were important, yes,
But it was the mammoths that represented true power, true transformation. And unlike a young wolf or timid reindeer, a fully grown mammoth could kill him with a single movement of its tusks. Was he willing to risk it? Was he ready to attempt the truly impossible? As he gazed at the stars, Kael knew the answer. He had crossed a line. He had proven that the relationship between human and animal could be reimagined. Now he needed to find out how far this new relationship could go. And the answer would begin to reveal itself in a way that no one, not even Kael, could have predicted. The next morning, while Kael was checking on the reindeer in the valley, he heard Naya cry out, not a cry of terror, but of urgency. He ran to the edge of the valley and looked where she was pointing. Less than 500 meters away, moving slowly through the snow, was a baby mammoth. Alone, without its herd. And by its size and clumsy movements, it was no more than 6 months old.
Kael felt his heart race. Mammoth calves were never alone. Something had happened, perhaps a predator attack, perhaps his mother had died, perhaps he had been lost during a storm. But there he was, a young mammoth, vulnerable, alone, and approaching the valley where the clan had established their new experiment. Kael looked at Naya. She looked back. They both thought the same thing. It was impossible. It was dangerous. It was utterly insane. But it was also an opportunity that might never come again. "Let's go get him," Kael said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. And with those words, the next phase of their impossible journey was about to begin. The mammoth calf moved awkwardly through the snow, its short trunk exploring the ground in search of something, food, its mother, anything familiar. He was no more than 5 feet tall, tiny compared to the 4-foot-tall adults Kael knew, but still massive enough to be dangerous if frightened. Kael approached slowly, very slowly, holding branches laden with dry leaves and lichen, food that young mammoths loved. Naya stayed behind with shadow, keeping the wolf still. Any sudden movement, any threatening sound, and the cub would flee, or worse, attack in panic. "Calm down, little giant," Kael whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Calm down. I'm here to help." The calf raised its furry head, its small ears twitching, its surprisingly expressive eyes fixed on Kael. There was fear there, but also something else. Hunger, loneliness, despair. Kael placed the branches in the snow 5 feet away and retreated. He crouched, becoming smaller, less threatening, and he waited. Minutes passed. The calf looked at Kael, then at the food, then back at Kael. Finally, hunger overcame caution. The little mammoth approached, its trunk extended, and grabbed the branches. It chewed them quickly, desperately, clearly famished. When it finished, the calf looked at Kael again, and this time it took a step toward him. Just one, but it was enough to make Kael's heart leap. Kael spent the next week in a careful ritual. Every morning he brought food to the calf, whom he began to call Tusk due to the small tusks that were beginning to grow. Each day, Tusk allowed Kael to get a little closer. On the 3rd day, Kael touched Tusk for the first time, just a brief touch on the calf's furry side. Tusk initially recoiled, but didn't run away. On the 5th day, Kael managed to stroke Tusk's trunk, feeling the strong, flexible muscles beneath the thick fur. On the 8th day, something extraordinary happened. Tusk voluntarily followed Kael back to camp. The entire clan came out to watch, keeping their distance, but marveling. A mammoth, even a baby one, walking calmly beside a human. It was like watching the sun rise in the west,
something that contradicted all logic, all experience, all history they had learned. "He trusts you," Theron said, his voice full of admiration and something else, a touch of fear. "But Kael, he's going to grow. In 2 years, he'll weigh 3 tons, in 5 tons. What happens when he's no longer a docile cub?" It was a fair question, and Kael didn't have a complete answer, but he had a theory.
"He will learn," Kael said, with a confidence he was far from feeling. "Just as Shadow learned, just as the reindeer learned. If we raise Tusk with us, if he sees us as his family, as his herd, he will stay with us." It was a huge gamble, but their entire journey had been a series of impossible bets. Weeks turned into months. The cruel winter began to recede, giving way to a cold but promising spring. And during that time, something extraordinary unfolded in the Northwind Hunters' camp. Tusk grew, gaining weight and height rapidly. But more importantly, he integrated into the clan's life in a way no one had anticipated. He followed Kael like a gigantic furry pup. He played with the clan's children, always supervised, always carefully. He even developed a curious relationship with Shadow. The wolf and the mammoth often rested together, 2 species that in nature would be enemies, now unlikely companions. The reindeer in the valley multiplied. The clan discovered they could milk some of the females, obtaining nutrition without needing to kill. They learned to use Shadow to guide the herd, moving the reindeer from one pasture to another without violence, only direction. But more importantly, Kael began teaching Tusk commands. Simple at first: come, stop, wait, but gradually more complex. He taught Tusk to pull logs tied with sinew ropes. He taught him to use his strength to move large stones. He taught him to respond to touches on different parts of his body, each touch signifying a different action. Naya became Kael's integral partner in this process. She had a gift for understanding Tusk's temperament, for knowing when he was frustrated, tired, or receptive to learning. Together, they created something that had never existed before, a true partnership between humans and megafauna. Other clans began to hear stories. Some sent emissaries to see if the rumors were true. When they saw Tusk obeying Kael's commands, when they saw the reindeer voluntarily remaining in the valley, when they witnessed this new way of life, many were skeptical. Some were angry, accusing Kael of witchcraft or breaking the laws of nature. But some saw possibility. They saw a future. Not all was harmony. Borin and several older hunters viewed Kael's methods with growing hostility. To them, Kael was weakening the clan, turning warriors into shepherds, hunters into herders. "We are becoming weak," Borin argued at a clan meeting during the first night of summer. "Our young no longer learn to hunt properly. They depend on domesticated animals. What happens when other clans come? What happens when predators attack in force? A pet mammoth and a few fat reindeer won't save us." There was truth in his words. The clan had changed. The children grew up playing with Tusk instead of learning to track and kill. The young hunters spent more time building enclosures and gathering plants to feed the reindeer than honing their spear skills. Theron, now fully recovered from his injuries, tried to mediate. He insisted there's room for both approaches. We can maintain hunting traditions while exploring these new methods. But the tension was growing, and it was about to explode in a way no one expected. It was during a hot summer night that disaster struck. A rival clan, the Red Moon Hunters, arrived unannounced. 20 warriors, armed and hungry. Their southern territory had been devastated by fires, and they had come to reclaim new hunting grounds. Their leader, a brutal man named Crag, known for his cruelty, assessed the Northwind hunters' camp with calculating eyes. He saw the fat reindeer in the valley. He saw a clan that seemed to have plenty, and he saw weakness. "You have two choices," Crag announced, his voice echoing through the main cave. "Either you join us under my leadership, or you leave. This territory is now ours." Theron stood, attempting diplomacy, but Crag was uninterested. "Look at you," he mocked, "playing with animals like children. Where are your hunters? Where is your strength?" It was then that Boren, driven by pride and rage, attacked Crag. His spear aimed at Crag's chest, but the Red Moon warriors were faster. 3 spears pierced Boren before he could complete his movement. He fell, his blood staining the cave floor. Chaos erupted. The Red Moon hunters attacked. Kael's clan, unprepared and outnumbered, began to retreat. Theron fought bravely but was surrounded. Children screamed, elders tried to flee, and Kael, outside with Tusk, heard the screams. Kael ran towards the chaos, his heart thundering. He could see his father fighting 3 warriors. He could see Naya trying to protect the younger children. He could see his clan being destroyed. And then something changed within him. It was no longer fear. It was no longer doubt. It was pure fury, crystallized into absolute determination. He turned to Tusk, who was agitated, sensing the danger. For a year, Kael had taught Tusk to be gentle, to control his strength, to be a peaceful part of the clan. Now he needed to awaken something different. He needed to awaken the giant that slept beneath the docile surface. "Tusk!" Kael shouted, his voice carrying authority and urgency. "Protect!" It was a command he had never used before, but Tusk understood. In Kael's tone, in the fear in the air, in the smell of blood, it all combined. The instincts Tusk had suppressed for months roared back to life. The mammoth, now nearly 2 meters tall and weighing over a ton, charged. The ground trembled. The Red Moon warriors turned, their eyes widening in terror. A mammoth, a real mammoth, was charging at them, and not randomly, but with direction and purpose. Tusk struck the first warrior with his still small tusks, launching him into the air. He trampled another, his steps making the earth tremble. But the most incredible thing, he differentiated. He attacked only the invaders, passing by members of Kael's clan without harming them. It was coordination. It was intelligence. It was a display of directed power that left everyone, both attackers and defenders, completely paralyzed. Crag, the proud and cruel leader, looked at Tusk and saw his death approaching. He dropped his spear and ran. His warriors followed him, fleeing in panic from the furious mammoth and the young man who somehow controlled it.
When silence finally returned, the cost was clear. Boren was dead. 2 other clan members had been gravely wounded. The cave was stained with blood, from the invaders, but also from the defenders. Tusk stood in the center, his flanks rising and falling with heavy breaths, his eyes still gleaming with adrenaline. Kael approached slowly, his hand outstretched. "Calm down, my friend," he whispered. "Calm down. It's over." Tusk calmed under Kael's touch, his massive body gradually relaxing, but all who witnessed it knew they had seen something that would change everything. Not just a domesticated animal, not just a source of food or labor, but a living weapon, a protector, an ally in war and in peace. Theron approached Kael, blood trickling from a wound on his arm. "You saved the clan," he said simply. But there was something more in her eyes. Admiration, yes, but also an understanding that something fundamental had changed. The student had surpassed the master.
The son had surpassed the father. That night, as the clan tended to the wounded and buried the dead, Naya sat beside Kael. They watched Tusk rest, the gentle giant snoring softly. "Do you realize what you did today?" she asked. "You didn't just save the clan. You proved your vision works, completely." Kael nodded, but his expression was grim. "At a cost. Borin is dead. Others are wounded, and now other clans will know. They will know what we have. They will know what we can do." "Is that bad?" Naya asked. "I don't know," Kael admitted. "We changed something fundamental, the relationship between humans and animals, between war and peace, between hunting and breeding. We opened a door that can never be closed again." He gazed at the stars, the same stars he had contemplated months ago when all this began. "The question now," he said softly, "is what we do with this power. How do we ensure it is used to build, not just to destroy?" In the days following the battle, messengers from other clans began to arrive. Some came with offers of alliance, others with requests to learn Kael's methods. Some simply came to see if the stories were true. A young man who commanded a mammoth, who raised animals instead of hunting them, who found a new way to survive in the brutal tundra. Theron, recognizing that the world had changed, made a historic decision. During a formal clan meeting, he stood and made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I have led this clan for 20 years, he said, his voice firm but heavy with emotion. "But the future no longer belongs to the old ways. It belongs to new visions, new possibilities. Kael, my son, you have proven not only courage, but wisdom beyond your years. It is time for you to lead." The clan fell silent. Then one by one, they began to strike their spears on the ground, the traditional sign of agreement. Even the oldest hunters who had doubted Kael recognized that he had earned the right to lead. Kael looked at his father, emotion flooding his chest. "He didn't do this alone, and I can't lead alone. Naya, come here." Naya approached, confused. Kael took her hand. "You saw what I didn't see. You understood what I only intuited. Lead with me, together." It was another unprecedented moment. A woman, especially one so young, had never been a leader, but these were unprecedented times. And when Theron placed his hands on Kael and Naya's heads, blessing them as the new leaders of the Northwind Hunters, everyone felt it. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was the birth of something entirely new.